And I add it's not here. So probably I have two bookshelves, one here in this room and another one downstairs. So I look. I think Carl actually mentioned that he has one of his Israel Finkelstein books, which is he wrote many books about different periods of time and about his work at Megiddo, at Tel Megiddo. So you can read his work. The other one is I mentioned him here as also Israel. His name is Israel Knuel, and he wrote more recent. If you want more recent, these are the two main books. I strongly recommend Israeli archaeologist. Another one that is very wrote a bunch of books is Neeman. What's his first name? Gee, not Yuval. I will find out his name maybe by the end of the, or maybe I will share it with Rabbi Singer and she will share it with you after the class. But yeah, and there are, the thing that they still learn in graduate school today is following the Bible or something. I think this is the name of the book, but there are a bunch of them. And again, it's different agendas of different perspectives and different agendas of different archaeologists and different professors, and they of course they put their personal perspective and into the book. Israel Finkelstein, I love him. He's great. He is the most, I think, is like is a genius in a way that he described the Bible. However, he is a minimalist, and he's from the University of Tel Aviv, and he is the kind of archaeologist that sometimes manipulates a little bit of the information and try to put too many pieces in the. I told you, archaeology is like building a puzzle with many missing pieces. And he tried forcefully to create missing pieces in order to fit it into his puzzle. It sounds like it from his different lectures that he had, but it does actually refer to evidence that were found in Egypt and in Israel and other places. Lynn, yes. If you unmute, please unmute.
Yeah. I was wondering what you think of one. I just read one book on covering a portion of the time, just a piecemeal, David Solomon, Finkelstein, and I forgot the other author.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned him in one of your talks before. What do you think of him?
Yeah.
He's good. I thought that book was good. I liked it.
It's a very, I just mentioned it, Israel Finkelstein.
Oh, okay. I didn't hear. Okay.
He has a colleague, his name is Lifshitz. He has a bunch of colleagues at the University of Tel Aviv, but look, a big archaeology department is in the University of Chicago. And they are always digging in the Middle East. Sometimes, in the last 100 years, they had a bunch of people that professors who came to Israel and dug in Israel. I will talk about one of them today, and I want to jump. Look up today. I will talk. I will finish the subject of David and Solomon, and then we'll jump to Jerusalem, which is probably the most excavated city in the world, I think. More than Rome, people say, more than Rome and more than what else, Athens. And they are constantly trying to find some evidence there in Jerusalem. We'll talk about it in a few minutes. And then I will try to summarize in just 10 minutes my entire 6 session. And again, there are no conclusion, and there are some conclusive evidence that people or the majority of the mainstream academia today can agree. like, for example, the uh, Exodus, the story of Exodus, and we talked about it. That as Exodus as described in the Torah, in the book of Exodus, there's no evidence, or there's no even close evidence that it happened at the scale that it happened in the book of it. We'll talk about it later when I summarize it. So I want to jump into my presentation. And this time, please tell me if you don't see. I'm going to share with you. Let's see. And I'm going to take a few slides back. And can you see that? Okay, good. Let's see it as a, okay. So something very, I told you last time, very peculiar, that you have three kings in the book of Samuel, which is Saul and David, and actually Solomon is with the book of Kings, but a little bit about Solomon, or the verse of Solomon in the book of Samuel, that are described in 57 chapters, okay? And basically, according to the years that are in the Bible, they cover 100 years. Saul was 20 years, David 40, and another 40 years of Solomon. The three of them together ruled for 100 years. The years are very, we cannot take these years and the value of these years as evidence, but especially with the number 40 repeats there. And the rest of the 38 kings in Israel and Judea, it's 37 chapters. It covers 350 years. Which is actually always gives, it's a question, it's a big question, and it's a big, you have to be skeptical only about that. And we definitely know that the stories were written in the 8th century, 7th century, 6th century, and King Solomon and King Saul, David, and we lived in the 10th century BC. So we know that most of the stories are just made up by the very creative writers who wanted to create this kind of a drama, definitely around David and around Solomon, and they have the different agendas. And we know that there are two schools of writers: the writers from the north and the writers from the south, the writers from the Kingdom of Israel and the writers from the Kingdom of Judea. And there is evidence in the text for that. This is evidence not in the text. This is what were found outside of Israel. And this is something I talked about. Just one evidence about one specific King Hezekiah. And it was found in northern Iraq. And it's actually the king of Sanherib, who actually came and he surrounded Jerusalem. It's in the Bible as well, in Kings 2nd, chapter 18, the same story. So we have a few stories from later kings, not from David, not from Saul, not from Solomon, that are described by external. When I say external, it's outside of Israel. Sources that were found in other places like Iraq, and basically it's Mesopotamia, Syria, and definitely Egypt. There's one stamp that was found that there's referred to the same king, but there's no story. So a stamp is not, it's an evidence that there was a king, Hezekiah, in Jerusalem. However, we don't know much about the thing from one simple stamp. This was found. This is the only evidence that were found outside of the Bible that there was actually the house of David, and it mentioned it regarding Yehoram, who was the son of Ahab, the king of Ahab. And it's not, again, it's not a Jewish or Hebrew writing. It's actually was writing by a Moabite writer. And it says actually that this king is from the house of David, referred to the head of the dynasty of the kings. So this is the only evidence that we have about King David. So we know from there that there was a King David somewhere in the history of the Jewish people. And here's the evidence of the two kinds of writers. We have the writers from the north and writers from the south. The writers from the north would try to portray David, even though he was the head of their own dynasty. They would try to portray him as not in a positive way. In the book of Samuel, we know the famous story of David and Goliath. Even though last week, if you remember, I told you that the story of David and Goliath is as two other stories with two other different people or two other different names of the person who actually killed Goliath in different occasions. But then you have King David was escaping from, was running away from Saul, and at one point even joined the Philistines, joined the king of Philistines, one of the kings of Philistines, to go and fight against Israel, against King Saul, and join the army of the enemy. And here we know, here's just a text that everyone that was in straits, everyone who is in debt, and everyone who was desperate, joined him. So you can see that he's a kind of gathering the outcasts, the people that got excommunicated by the community, and gathered them and created his own 400-man army. So it's not so compliment for David of being the leader of this bunch of people that were outlawed. So this is just to show you how the conflicts in the text, the different contradictions in the text about trying to talk about David and portray David in a positive and negative way, which is very, very unique. It's not, you won't see it, for example, all the pharaohs in Egypt. If you want to write about the pharaoh and you are a writer during the time of pharaoh, of the specific pharaoh, you will never write anything negative about them. So here we have some negative writing against, or try to portray him in a negative perspective, King David. And you have this contradiction, the entire text about King David, stealing Bathsheba, who was a married woman, sending her husband to the war and basically killed him, and so on and so on. There are so many stories about David that were basically negative about him, something that it's very peculiar if you write about the king. Here's another contradiction in the text when we refer to King Solomon. Okay, so here, so this is on King 1, chapter 8, verse 65. It says, so King Solomon, so Solomon and all Israel with him, a great assemblage, and from the Lebo Hamad to Valley of Egypt, which is huge. Lebo Hamad is in Lebanon, all the way to the north of Israel, now Israel of today, all the way down to the Valley of Egypt, which is kind of on the border with the kingdom of Egypt. So he controlled this huge area. But the emphasis here is about the word Israel. So he actually controlled the United Kingdom of Israel. Okay, so you can see that the top part here, top part of the text, which is King 1, chapter 8, was written by a Judean, a J writer, not the E writer. We talked about the different writers. This is the south part of writer who basically tried to give Solomon the credit of ruling so much territory and controlling Israel as the United Kingdom. However, when you get to the Northern writers, to the E writer, it says all days of Solomon, and this is a chapter 5, it's 3 chapters before that. All days of Solomon, now they actually split the kingdom. You can see the Judea and Israel, now it's split, even though it was not split in the time of Solomon. From Dan to Beersheba, very, very limited, very limited territory. Dan is about where Tel Aviv is, okay? Tel Aviv of today, the shore, the area of the shore. Beersheba, it's somewhere in the center of the Negev, it's the capital of the Negev. So the territory is very small, much smaller than actually from all the way from Lebanon to the border of Egypt. And shows you that the E-writer, tried to show Solomon as, he was a leader, but it was not that great. He just controlled very, very a small part of the land, of the territory of the land of Canaan. So you see this, the text basically oscillates between praising Solomon to show Solomon in a very negative way. It's a very interesting thing because Solomon is described as the smartest one, the greatest leader, about being a judge, being a fair judge, and then all of a sudden the following chapters you have Solomon as taking 1,000 women as his wives and concubine, and then eventually became a sinner. The guy, the greatest king who built the Holy Temple in Jerusalem, the first temple, is the one who actually, at the end of his rule, turned his back to his own faith by, again, and of course attributed to the women that were around him. So this is just to show you that when you read the text, you always have to look at the different writers and the different agenda of the writers. Now, the biggest question, again, was there a King Solomon? Was there a king? And we talked about it last week a little bit. And there's no evidence. And the next thing is what I told you, David Oshishkin, who was a professor, retired a few years ago. And he said that in every inch of biblical Jerusalem, except for the Temple Mount, was turned over again during the many excavations they took from 1851. And it says, being realistic, he basically said that there's no evidence that there was of the magnificent Solomonic capital right there in the middle of Israel. He's right, but he's partially right. And even his colleague at the University of Tel Aviv, which I just mentioned him, Israel Finkelstein, is saying that yes, but no. And the main point is this. The main point is that we cannot, there was no, we cannot, not Israelis and not before the establishment of Israel from 1851, none of the excavation happened in the Temple Mount, where the Dome of the Rock exists, and what most of the professors, most of the archaeologists today in Israel and outside of Israel, except for a few, and I will show you one of them, they agree that the mound that is the most important, and this is where Jerusalem was, where you can actually excavate and find some evidence about this ancient time in the 10th century Jerusalem. It's under the Temple Mount. It's wider, but since we don't want Armageddon and a holy war, nobody can actually excavate it. So this is Eilat Mazar. I told you that she died only a few months ago, or I think maybe late 2020. And she's a granddaughter of archaeologists who dug in Jerusalem. So she followed her grandfather's steps, and she also excavated in not the Temple Mount, but in the ridge, in the extension of the ridge of the Temple Mount, and she found different places, and one of them is actually the tunnel where there's water there, and this great wall that she believed that is the great wall it's the wall of the Solomon's palace. Because it is described in the Bible that Solomon Palace was one of the greatest palaces in the region. And not only that he built the Holy Temple, he also built his old palace and fortified the city. This was this, declaration that you found the wall was contradicted by some of her colleagues, some colleagues not in Jerusalem. She is from the Hebrew University in Jerusalem, so she is a maximalist, compared to Israel Finkelstein, who is actually a minimalist, who doesn't agree with her. He doesn't agree with her, and he said that it's not a palace; it's just to fortify some parts of the city, and he thinks that it's not even from the 10th century BC. So this is the argument right now, and the dispute around this wall, part of what Eilat Mazar dug in Jerusalem. Now, when we talk about Jerusalem, there is a problem because there's no evidence except for this wall and maybe a few other small minor evidence that were found in the excavation in Jerusalem. There is a hole in history. What happened in the 10th century BC in Jerusalem? We don't, what really happened, because there's no writing in Israel. Nobody found any papyrus. Nobody found any stela, that says, the story of Solomon, the story of David, and so on, except for the Bible again. So the biggest question, and Israel Finkelstein always asked himself this question: said, let's say we didn't have the Bible. If we were just looking at science, purely at archaeology, without referring to the Bible, we're forgetting that there is a text called the Bible, what can we find on the ground in Jerusalem from the time of these great three kings? And the evidence is very minimal. So we have to look outside of Israel. And this is where actually everything goes to Egypt, because Egypt, where they recorded a lot of information from that time. 1 second, just turn to the page. And one great king there, one great pharaoh, the great pharaoh of Shishak. Shishak is mentioned in the Bible, but if we not even want to refer to the Bible, want to look at what they found, I can show here. These are the two evidence that they found about Shishak. This is in the right part here. It's the writing in the Temple of Karnak, and I mentioned Karnak when we talked about the Exodus. It's one of the biggest religious and there's so much evidence about different religious sites in the world, and there are some evidence about many pharaohs during Shishak time and before Shishak, and I'm talking about hundreds of years before Shishak. And there's this evidence that was found by accident, was found in Tel Megiddo, and I mentioned Megiddo a few sessions ago. This is where Israel Finkelstein dug there in the 1980s. But before Finkelstein was there were 3 rounds of excavation. One was in the 1950s, Another one was in the I think 1925 to 1939, when the war started, the Second World War started. There was a group from the University of Chicago, and even before that. So the group from the University of Chicago, they found it in the 1930s. They found a piece that mentioned on the, you cannot see the writing, the quality of this picture is not so great, but it's a huge stone, and on the stone is actually mentioned the name of Pharaoh, the Pharaoh Shishak who conquered Megiddo at the time. So let's go back to the map, and you can see this is the map that Shishak's campaign was. So we know that Shishak was actually ruled Egypt between 1943 to 1922, which is the 10th century. This is the time that we are searching for some information about Solomon and David. But we know that he had a successful campaign, and we know also today there are also a few speculation about why he had this campaign at that time. I will tell you in a second. And he went through with his army, and at one point the army split. They went to south. Part of the army went to Arad, and the city of Arad is still there. And today there's the old city, and there's a Tel Arad, which is another archaeological site. Then they went to Gezer, and Gezer, we know where Gezer is located. Then he went to Jerusalem, even though it's interesting because it didn't mention, the Egyptian writing didn't mention Jerusalem. But historians and archaeologists add Jerusalem mainly because of the Bible, and we know that King Shishak was during the Bible. He was there, and then he went north, and at one point he crossed the Jordan River to the east side of the Jordan River, and then he was in Megiddo. There's an evidence that was found that he was there in Megiddo. The main reason was actually to create some kind of a safe path of copper. So they found in the Jordanian side, in the other side of the Jordan River, they found ancient copper mines that are dated in the specific time, even though it's hundreds of years. They used these copper mines for hundreds of years, but it is actually was active at the time that Shishak was there as well. So he went through this military campaign, and it says in King chapter 11, this is after Solomon. Right after King Solomon died, the split of the two kingdoms between Yeroboam and Rehoboam, and Rehoboam was the son of Solomon. And it says on the 5th year of King Rehoboam, King Shishak of Egypt marched against Jerusalem, and they carried off the treasures of the house of the Lord, and the treasure of the royal palace. And he carried off everything. He even carried off all the golden shields that Solomon has made. Okay. So this is what we know about. I will just stop share now, and I want to show you some interesting thing. But this is what we know about the 10th century BC. However, even with this evidence, we cannot say that Solomon was there. King Shishak didn't come to Israel when Solomon was the king, and but we know that his son was there. This is from the Bible. Even though in Egypt, in all the writings about King Shishak in Egypt, Jerusalem is not mentioned, which is very peculiar, because we just saw in the biblical text that not only that he's been in Jerusalem, but he took all this, he basically looted Jerusalem. And he didn't mention it. He mentioned Gezer, he mentioned Arad, he mentioned Megiddo, he mentioned all the other sites, Shechem, and he didn't mention Jerusalem, which is a very, very important city. and you can say that it not only bought the city, he had a great success in this city. Even though he didn't conquer it, he actually got whatever he wanted from King Rehavam. So it's actually, this is even mentioned. I want to show it, just a very short video. Show. Let's see if I can share the video sound. Here we go. This is from, you probably know this archaeologist. This archaeologist is probably the most famous archaeologist in history. His name is Indiana Jones. He's not a real archaeologist, played by Harrison Ford. And this is see what they say about King Shishak and about Jerusalem.
The city of Tanis is one of the possible resting places of the Lost Ark.
The Lost Ark?
Yeah, the Ark of the Covenant, the chest the Hebrews used to
Can you hear the sound? Is it okay?
Yes.
Okay, good.
carry around the Ten Commandments.
What do you mean commandments? You're talking about the Ten Commandments?
Yes, the actual Ten Commandments, the original stone tablets that Moses brought down out of Mount Horeb and smashed, if you believe in that sort of thing. Either you guys ever go to Sunday school?
Well,
Oh, well, look. The Hebrews took the broken pieces and put them in the Ark. When they settled in Canaan, they put the Ark in a place called the Temple of Solomon,
in Jerusalem.
where it stayed for many years, until all of a sudden, whoosh, is gone.
Where?
Well, nobody knows where or when.
However, an Egyptian pharaoh
Shishak.
yes, invaded the city of Jerusalem around about 980 BC, and he may have taken the ark back to the city of Tanis and hidden it in a secret chamber called the Well of Souls.
Secret chamber.
However, about a year after the pharaoh had returned to Egypt, the city of Tanis was consumed by the desert in the
Of course, this is a story, but he did mention King Shishak and of him stealing the tablets and the rest of the story. This is the beginning of the movie. If you want to watch it again, it's a great movie to watch. But they said, because they actually refer to the biblical text, they said that King Shishak actually not only took all the gold and everything, he actually from the Holy Temple he took the sacred tablets, the tablets that Moses got on the top of Mount Sinai. So this is in pop culture. You can see that they refer to King Shishak and everything. So this is what we know about King Shishak, which actually can give us a beginning of. The very important thing is to date things by archaeologists and archaeologists. We know that. Yeah, I will show this. This is the two dynasties, the Judea dynasty versus Israel dynasty. You can see that it doesn't include, of course, Solomon and David because they were referred to like the United Kingdom, but if King Shishak, according to the Bible, according to the Book of Kings, chapter 11, King 1, it says that he was in Jerusalem on the 5th year of the reign of Yerovam. We can approximately date the beginning of Rehoboam rule, okay? Because we know that King Shishak was the ruler between 1943 to 1922. I'm sorry, 19. What is the 19? I'm sorry, 943 to 922. We know that he campaigned in Israel at around the year of 926. So we just have to go 5 years back and get to the beginning of the rule of Rehoboam, and the rest of and then we can actually get the dates of the rest of the kings, more or less. Again, we don't have the specific months. Sometimes we don't have the specific year, but one year there, or 2 years. It's not the differences are not. It's semantic. It's not that changed the entire thing. And we have other emperors. We have 722 that we know that they are Syrian, conquered the North kingdom, and so on. We have other, by the way, other kings. King Pharaoh Nebuchadnezzar is the one who executed, killed King Josiah. I mentioned King Josiah last time. So we know that it was at the year of 609. So we know where King Josiah actually ruled, and so on and so on. But it's interesting to see that we date King Shishak and King Rehoboam at the same time. At the same, they ruled at the same time, parallel time, in Judea and in Egypt. So just to show you the thing, a little bit about King Shishak. Any questions so far before I'm jumping to Jerusalem? Anyone? Okay. So again, the lack of evidence, and many archaeologists will tell you that the lack of evidence doesn't mean that there was no Solomon and there was no David. And we know that Jerusalem was a very, very important kingdom before these kings, from the El Amarna letters in Egypt that were found in Egypt in the year of 1887. In 1887, they found close to 400 letters between leaders in Israel, in Canaan at the time, and I'm talking about 14th century BC. Years even before, what we believe was Exodus, because remember we believe that Exodus actually was in the late 13th century BC, and one of the rulers that was sending letters to Pharaoh in Egypt was his name was Abdi Heba. He was the ruler of a city called, according to the Egyptian one, was called Jerusalem, which is actually very similar to Yerushalayim that we know today, or Jerusalem in English. One of the letters, for example, was dated at around the year 1352. That basically said that he needs some help, he needs some reinforcement to his army because it's being attacked. Jerusalem is being attacked. So he's asking the Pharaoh to send some forces, reinforcement to come to Jerusalem. We know that Jerusalem was a location, was a city that was right there at that central place, that the same place that we know Jerusalem is today. However, it's very peculiar that the city was built there, and I will show you why. And this is where archaeologists have some issues with the city of Jerusalem. Here's the city of Jerusalem from this is two different illustrations for what they believe was around the time of King Solomon. So you can see that what Eilat Mazar found, this big great wall, was around this area, which is not on the top of the hill. It's not on the top of the ridge. The ridge is actually, it's a slope. The area that is right on the top is where the Dome of the Rock is located today, and there's no way that there's any digging there. And by the way, people said that even if there was a permission to dig there and there was an agreement with the Muslims or other religion to dig there, most likely, very high percentage that they couldn't even find anything from the 10th century BC, mainly because when King Herod ruled Jerusalem, and King Herod was the ruler in the first century BC. So we're talking about almost 1,000 years after Solomon. He basically rebuilt the entire area. He brought tons and tons of soil and built everything that we have today. Even the big stones of the of the Western Wall. Is not from the time of definitely not from the time of Solomon, because the temple was destroyed, and the people went to Babylon. But even not from the second temple that was built by the people who returned from Persia at the time. I'm talking about in the 6th century. No, sorry, 5th century BC. And the 1st century BC, King Eros rebuilt the entire area. And so even if they were able to dig there, it will actually removing tons of soil outside of the holy city today, the old city of Jerusalem, that it could have been like a mission impossible. And most likely mission impossible even to find any evidence that was left by the early kings of Israel. But be that as it may, the belief of archaeologists that they found the palace right here in this location, like Eilat Mazar, most likely it's not. It cannot be close to reality, because when you locate the palace, look at the terrain of Jerusalem and the area of Jerusalem. The landscape it doesn't give you any protection. If you locate your palace on the top of the hill, that you get some protection, but all the hills around Jerusalem, the old city of Jerusalem, and around this ridge, the central ridge of Jerusalem, are inferior. I'm sorry, the hills are superior to this central hill. So you can see it even today. If you just stand in Jerusalem, I will show you just a picture that, what did I do? I stopped the sharing, okay. Let me see 1 second, I will find it. Even if you look at the city today, you will see that the old city, if you stand on any hill around the old city of Jerusalem, you will find that Jerusalem is actually lower than any hills around it. So I will show you just here, just a few pictures, and it's easy to see. So just look at the picture right here. This is the old city of Jerusalem. This is the Dome of the Rock. Under the Dome of the Rock, if you haven't been there, there is a rock. There is a kind of a rock right there. And this is where the Muslim believe that it's under a glass protection, and the Muslim believe that Muhammad, the Prophet Muhammad, was sent to heaven from there. This is the old city of Jerusalem. You can see this is the Mount Olives, the cemetery of Mount Olives, definitely, or a little above the old city of Jerusalem. This is Har HaTzofim, okay, the Mount of what do you call it? Mount Scopus, is the name? I forgot the name in English, but it's
Scopus.
Scopus. I'm sorry.
Scopus.
Yeah, Mount Scopus. It's actually also even more. It's higher than the Har HaTzofim. If you look on the other side, look at this. This is the other side. Of course, you have buildings and tall buildings, and this is the new Jerusalem. This is the new city, not the old city. But even this hill actually can look at the old city of Jerusalem, or what we believe was actually the original city of Jerusalem. So this is the location of Jerusalem is inferior. It's very weird, but then this is why it was so easy to conquer Jerusalem. Not so easy, but easy to conquer Jerusalem by different armies, because they basically come from all directions and they can see Jerusalem from above. And so what archaeologists believe that, I will share with you this, back to this, archaeologists believe that this was actually an extension that was built much later. And the core of the city, okay, was right here on the top of the top of the mound, the top of the ridge, including the palace of the king, including the Holy Temple. Here, actually, according to these two illustrations, most most of the top of the hill is actually the Holy Temple. And yes, there are measurements of the Holy Temple and the way that, it's written in the Bible. However, we have to take with the measurements with a grain of salt, because the measurement basically, it means that the Holy Temple was occupied almost the entire top of the hill of Jerusalem. But they believe that actually the core of the city, including the palace of the king and including the Holy Temple, was right here in this location. Therefore, what the statement of what's his name is Oshishkin, the statement of Oshishkin that there's no evidence that Solomon was there, we have to take it with a grain of salt, because we cannot excavate there. We cannot see that there was actually some kind of a small kingdom right here on the top of the mountain that was ruled by Solomon and before him by David. So we definitely cannot see that. So this extension is when the city started to, when people started to move to the city and became the central, the capital city of Judea. This illustration, it's interesting. It's supposedly from the time of King Solomon, and you remember it says that this King Solomon in the Bible, it says that he fortified the city, and he created a wall around the city, and so on and so on. And it's also very weird that you will create a city on the you create the palace or even the city or the main of the city in the lowest point of the ridge. So anyway, so this is the just to show you how Jerusalem gives us an indication that we can never, and probably we will never in our lifetime at least, we won't know if the King Solomon and King David were actually really real people, and what extent they ruled, what was the territory of their city. And there is actually a section, and I know that maybe one of the questions will be, those of you who've been in Jerusalem, there's a section outside of the old city of Jerusalem that the word for this is Ir David, but it's not Ir David, it's not the city of David. It just named that they just label it Ir David because of the biblical text. But there's no indication whatsoever that David was actually the one that was there. Now, one question?
There's a comment from Joan Schneider. She says, but there were lower drainages surrounding the hill. This would put attackers at a disadvantage.
But there were lower
Joan, do you want to be more specific about that?
Yeah, I mean, they might have been higher hills around, but they had to go down to go up to the city. And anybody in the city could throw things or catapult things while attackers were in the lower elevation surrounding the city.
You're right. So this is what it was difficult. What historians said, it was difficult to conquer the city in the old times before the Greeks and the Romans. But the Romans are the one who actually developed the long range. Yes. So yes, exactly. So this is where why the Romans were very successful of actually conquer the city in a shorter time of siege. But it was very easy to create a siege around the city. To create the city, when you have the city like a city that is not surrounded by hills, that it's a hill by itself. Yes, you can create a siege, but if you are on the top of the people that are below you, you can easily kill them and attack them from the top down. But it was actually, you're right, it was difficult to capture the city. It's easier to create a siege around the city, and this is before the Romans.
Yes.
And you can see that King Shishak just walked by. He just walked by and said, "Give me your gold, or I will destroy the city," and just continued to go. He didn't even want to deal with the city. He just took whatever he wanted, and he kept the Judean kingdom. And there were others who did the same, even during the King Hezekiah, that you can see that Sancheriv came from the north, and he just sent some people to get some money from King Hezekiah. So anyway, this is the story. Again, it was a pleasure to teach about this subject. And again, there's no definite answer. There's always, like everything, it's not an exact science that look, even with the exact science, think about what we have today. People tell you that if you take the vaccine, you will be, I don't know, 98% covered, and still 40% of the Americans don't believe this. So even with what we know today as a kind of the real science, there's a conflict, and there's the debate and dispute and whatever it is. So with archaeology and history, there's always be something. Of course, they will find always something new, and they excavate all the time. All the time, Israel is like kind of the number one site for excavation. I know that a lot of resources are now directed to also other areas of Egypt today, but also to what's the name of the city, the Italian city that was destroyed by a volcano.
Pompeii.
Yes, Pompeii. So you can see in the news more and more news from there, because they are now digging in Pompeii. But in Israel, there's always something coming up. However, not the latest news didn't come about the time of the period of the Bible. You can see things from the Byzantine time and from the Roman time, which is later years. But when you read the Bible, you say, you have to be skeptical if you understand who wrote it, if you understand the agenda of the writers. But eventually, at one point, the Bible will catch up with history, and the writers will be at the same time that there will be the writers that who wrote the text. But this will actually catch up only with the around the year 850, when already the two kingdoms were split. And it's about 100 years after either Solomon or David. So it's always telling stories. The early kings are actually kind of writing about the history, not writing about events that happen right here, right now. And especially the stories from the Torah that we know that were written many years later, after supposedly the events happened. But we talked about that as well, that and especially I started with Exodus because, and a little bit with Jacob and with Exodus, because we know that earlier stories of Isaac and Abraham, and definitely the story of Noah and the story of creations, are kind of legends of kind of stories that create a theology. It's called the theology of reason why we believe, what's the faith, what's the connection as a nation, and so on and so on. So yeah.
Let's see if we have any questions, any final questions. Anybody? No? Well.
Oh, I wanted to know if the letters that they found in Egypt, were they papyri or were they on stone? How do we still have them?
The letters are on stone. They call letters, but it's etched in stone. It's actually engraved in stone. And they found, I think, was close to 400 letters from different cities. And then you can actually see that there were cities like the city of Hatzor and the city of Megiddo that I mentioned a few sessions ago. The kings there used to exchange letters with Pharaoh, with the local Pharaoh. Finkelstein in one of his lectures said, every diplomat who wants to negotiate peace, who wants to talk about current times, want to talk about peace in the Middle East of today, have to go and read the letters, because it basically history repeats itself.
Yeah.
So think about it today,
Are
Israel.
these actually stone tablets?
Yeah,
Like a little piece of stone that you could carry to another
yeah,
city.
yeah, yeah, yeah. You can actually, it's called it's called El Amarna letters. So if you Google that, you will see there are many pictures of different letters that were written between Israel and Egypt. And the thing is, they wrote it to ask for the local empire. The local empire was the Egyptian empire. For example, the king of Jerusalem asked for reinforcement for this army against external threat that he had. And think about Israel today. Today, actually, right here, the department, what do you call it? The defense minister of Israel landed in Washington to talk about an external threat of the Iranians and other countries against Israel. So Israel is always going to an empire and ask for, we are the Americans, actually, we send a lot of money to Israel, and we definitely send a weapon and support their weapon purchase of the Israelis, very similar to the 14th century BC of Jerusalem and Egypt. But instead of Egypt, today, instead of Egypt is the United States, and instead of Jerusalem is the entire country of Israel. It's still, the message actually comes from the same city, from Jerusalem. Yeah.
Anyone else? Any last questions? Well, Eran, thank you so very much for this very informative series. I think it burst some of our mythologies, but that's a good thing. And so for those who missed it, we'll let them know what the link is, and look forward to seeing you in some other capacity soon. So good night, everyone.
Night.
Good night, everybody. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.